Say you're a psychologist that came back from a really rough 9 to 5. I should have gotten into business, you say to yourself. So you decide to unwind and hop on Netflix. After scrolling through what seem like hours, you tell yourself, I want to scare myself for an hour and a half because that sounds like fun. So you decide to watch Scream, a really fun horror movie that I recommend. But then, as you're watching and getting jump scared by Ghostface, you're thinking to yourself, out of all genres, why horror? If you think about comedy movies, for example, comedy induces laughter, and laughter is great, laughter is fun, laughter is awesome. I love laughing. But when you think about fear, fear is generally very unpleasant. Why do we ever want to get scared? So, for today's talk, we'll be learning more about fear, the fear response, and how that all ties into why we enjoy recreational horror. To start, fear is not something that's exclusively human. We see in tons of other animals as well. Cats, for example, arch their backs when they're scared to make themselves look scarier, although they still look pretty damn cute. Dogs, for example, run away and hide from their predators, and skunks turn around and spray them with a very unpleasant smell. But what does that look like for humans? Well, for humans, fear is actually our most primitive emotion. Essentially what that means is it's our first and oldest emotion. And the reason for that is because fear helped us survive and reproduce, which is the essence of natural selection. So you have a threat such as a very scary looking butterfly, totally not because I have a phobia of butterflies. Upon seeing this butterfly, it induces a fear response, like running away, for example. And once again, this is the essence of how fear evolved. Through the fear response, we were able to properly deal with threatening stimuli. But how does this all work? Our fear response, also known as the fight or flight response, induces a cascade of changes in our body. First is an increased heart rate. Through an increased heart rate, we have more oxygen being pumped to our muscles. To compensate for that, we do have an increased respiration rate. With a higher respiration rate, we have an increased intake of oxygen. And finally, we do have some hormonal changes in our body. All of these work together to produce our fight or flight response to help us deal with threats. But again, where does this all begin? Well, our fight or flight response is regulated by our limbic system. Our limbic system is essentially a group of brain structures that regulate behavior, memory, and most importantly, emotion. So for today's talk, we'll be looking at two key brain structures. These are the amygdala and hypothalamus. The amygdala is an almond-like structure in the brain that works with their sensory systems to detect fearful and uncertain stimuli. Say you have a very scary-looking guy, such as Freddy Krueger. Upon seeing Freddy Krueger, your visual system will send all that information to your amygdala, which will then detect it as a threat and then activate. Upon the activation of the amygdala, the hypothalamus will then be signaled to initiate the fight or flight response. The hypothalamus will then signal to activate a part of your nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system, which will then eventually lead to the release of two important chemicals, epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and also norepinephrine. And these are called catecholamines, and these are essential in initiating the fight or flight response. But again, how does this all tie into how we enjoy recreational horror? Well, turns out at certain levels, bursts of catecholamines can actually activate our reward system. Our reward system is a system in our brain that regulates motivation and pleasure. So essentially how this works is as you're watching horror movies, getting jump scared by Ghostface, you're activating that reward system, producing dopamine, giving you that feeling of euphoria. But to what extent do we enjoy fear? One study actually sought out to answer this question. So they got a bunch of participants, exposed them to fearful stimuli, and asked them to report their fear and enjoyment. And turns out, fear takes the shape of an inverted U-shaped curve. Essentially, what that means is that fear needs to be just right in order for it to be enjoyable. And this kind of makes sense if you really think about the catecholamines. Too much catecholamines can lead to anxiety and panic, while too little can make you feel really bored. And this actually does explain why we have some individual differences in horror preference. Some people may be more sensitive than others, so they may find horror too scary or not even scary enough. I, for one, I'm terrified of heights, so I could never go on a roller coaster because I would literally piss my pants. Again, so what's the key message from this? First things first, being scared is okay. Like me being on stage right now, my brain is telling me, Adam, you need to get out of here. And I'm like, you're right, brain. I really want to get out of here. But again, fear is normal. It's a thing that we all experience, and we experience it for a reason. It's because it helped us survive through generations and generations. And secondly, the ability to turn something so unpleasant like fear into something so enjoyable is something uniquely human. So embrace it. So I recommend watching some of these really fun horror movies. But make sure to know your limit with horror. That being said, thank you.